Well, thank you so much for being here and being at this space. I have to say, you know, your presentation yesterday was remarkable. I was really incredibly moved by it because it covered so much ground. So can you tell people a little bit about what the work is that you're doing at the moment?
The work that I presented yesterday was looking at the ways that rāranga research methodology, and rāranga is are the traditions of, or one of the traditions of Māori weaving. And I'm looking at particularly the ways that rāranga can be transformative. And so what I was presenting on yesterday was looking at the ways that rāranga can be transformative in terms of gender identity. And so I was really looking at the ways, or discussing the ways that rāranga can be like an in-between space. It can be quite fluid. And it can also help balance between things that seem like they're opposites or seem like they're coming from opposite directions. Rāranga can help, I think, navigate the in-between space of those things.
I loved what you were talking about too, and I think it was last night actually, not in the presentation, but you were talking about performance and that relationship with that process that I've always thought of as as that sort of weaving process, and of course that you have a far more complex way of thinking about it, but that you saw that there was an interplay between your knowledge of one and then you moving it into another.
Yeah, like when I was doing my master's study, I started to look at the ways that rāranga as a physical process of weaving natural fibres, how that could be translated into other media. And primarily it was because I was living in Canada at the time and I couldn't find the weaving materials that I normally weave in.
Oh, right.
And I tried lots of other types of materials, but they kind of just didn't really cut it for me. And in the end I had my laptop, so I started working with digital media and using really sequential kind of process of gathering footage or images, processing them, and then layering them to get something else. And after doing that for maybe a year, I was like, okay, well, this is really flat. This is really ephemeral. What happens when I translate that same process again into a physical space that is still quite ephemeral? What happens when I do that? And so I started to think about, okay, if weaving is internalizing muscle memory in this space, what happens when I start internalizing forms of patterns that are in this entire space? Like, what happens? How am I able to transform a more ephemeral space using weaving with my body? And so that got me into thinking about traditional Māori performance, kapa haka. And kapa haka is a group performance, so it's my work isn't really kapa haka, it's haka. It's really started to make me think about, okay, well, how can haka be transformative? If haka is a type of weaving with your body, how does that transform? What is the in-between space that I can interrogate through performance in my body, I suppose.
And of course the in-between space is so much of what you were talking about yesterday in terms of gender. And to some extent sexuality, but I suppose for me the discussion of gender was it was transformative. I mean, I hadn't thought about a whole lot of those ideas before that had occurred to you. I mean, obviously you're thinking about how gender plays out in your body, but you're actually then extending it into your creative practice in a way that I think is remarkable. Can you talk a little about that? Or I mean, it's very difficult. Yeah. I know it was a very complex story that you told, but I wonder if you could take a moment.
I think I think a lot of what colonisation, especially through institutional structures and spaces, has done is to, for us as Indigenous people, it has it's actualised the situation where we've started to become disembodied. And I think as Indigenous peoples, we're very, very strongly embodied in what we do. But through these social structures and these institutional spaces, we're all up here again, and I can hear it in our language back home. Like, I mean, I'm a beginner speaker, but I can understand the concepts embedded in that language. And like when I watch the Māori news, for example, the language is really, really complex. But then when I watch a documentary of elders speaking, the language is so simple and it's beautiful, and you can understand. I can understand it, I should say. But the news, it's almost like we've taken our English ways of thinking and put our language into that box, and it's changed the way that we think, like, or it is changing the way we think. And so I'm interested in how repatterning our bodies with the kinds of processes or creative practices that our ancestors use, how that can help bring our sense of self back into our bodies again. So that, I mean, there is that in-between space of our heads and our hearts and our bodies, and well, it is our heart really, and it's like, well, how do we live in that central space again? Like, how are we able to feel again? How are we able to emote? How are we able to express the things that we feel without feeling shy or embarrassed about those things? Because our ancestors weren't embarrassed about a lot of things. They were really open, they were expressive, they were creative, they were beautiful people. And we can hear that in our stories, and we can hear that in our songs, and we can see that and especially in our creative works. And so I'm really, really interested in how traditional arts practices as a form of theory can help resolve some of the separation that's happened in our minds and bodies.
Thank you so much. And again, it was remarkable, and it was a lovely way to end the day yesterday. So thanks.
Kia ora, thank you.